Highway 11 north of Bracebridge, Ontario, Provincial Police. Late November 1956, 20 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. Constable Walter Ferguson, 9 years at this detachment, has pulled onto the gravel shoulder and is standing at the open door of a marked Chevrolet patrol sedan, looking north up the road at something a passenger would not be able to see. The pavement in front of him is bare and gray. 200 yards further on, fine snow has begun to move across the surface in thin ribbons, left to right, and Ferguson is watching how far up the shoulder those ribbons climb before they break apart. He is not deciding whether to keep going. He is deciding what the township road 11 miles ahead is going to look like when he reaches it, and he is deciding it now, from here, because in 20 minutes the light will be gone and the decision will be harder. A note on Ferguson before we go further. He is a composite, drawn from published force histories and from the documented structure of small Ontario detachments in this decade. The detachment he works out of is documented. The car is documented. The radio in the car is documented, down to the year it came on the air. What he is doing on that shoulder is documented practice. What is not documented, anywhere, by anyone, is the specific content of what 9 years on this road put inside him. That absence is the subject of this video. There is one more thing about Ferguson that is worth holding on to. 400 miles west of where he is standing, on a road of comparable size and comparable weather, a constable is doing comparable work. That constable does not wear an Ontario crest. He wears a federal one. By 1956, almost every province in Canada had handed provincial policing to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police under contract. Ontario had not. Quebec had not. Why did those two provinces keep their own forces? And what did that decision actually change for a man standing on a shoulder in November, reading snow? Start with what Ferguson has, because it is more than most people assume and less than the map suggests. The Ontario Provincial Police was created on 13 October 1909. Sources differ slightly on the founding complement. The Canadian Encyclopedia records 51 officers drawn from frontier police forces, government detectives, and northern provincial constables, while the force's own museum lists a superintendent, a senior inspector, 2 inspectors of criminal investigation, 2 divisional inspectors, and 45 provincial constables. Both figures describe the same thing, a very small force for a very large province. The car under Ferguson's hand is comparatively new as an institution. The OPP patrolled Ontario's roads on motorcycle until 1941, when the first marked cars for regular patrol use were purchased, Chevrolet coupes replacing the highway patrol machines. 15 years later, the marked sedan is standard. The radio is newer still, and it matters more. On 27 November 1947, the OPP put a province-wide FM police radio network on the air, described at the time as the largest of its kind. It ran on low-band VHF, one frequency out from dispatch, another back from the cruisers. That gave Ontario something no province west of it had in 1947. A provincial force with its own network, answering to a provincial government, covering a provincial territory, and underneath that, the structure that put Ferguson where he is. Through the 1940s, the OPP extended coverage to every part of Ontario not served by a municipal force, and the Municipal Act of 1944 let municipalities contract township policing directly from the province. Ferguson is not passing through. He is the police of these townships, by contract, and he will still be here next winter. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you have been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of Canadian patrol between 1900 and 1980. The vehicle, the posting, the territory knowledge that years in one place built in the officer who covered the same ground in 4 seasons, and the communities those officers served, in the full complexity of what that service meant in this era. Not Mountie mythology. The documented operational and human reality of patrol in a country whose geography required its officers to know their territory the way no centralized system has ever been asked to know it. What did years at one detachment give this officer that no GPS and no centralized dispatch has ever been designed to hold? And if you served in this era, or your family did, put it in the comments. If you or someone in your family wore the OPP or the Sûreté uniform in the 1950s or 1960s, What did the detachment know about its own territory that never went into a report? Next on this channel, the Newfoundland Ranger Force, 1935 to 1950, the constable who walked his patrol, and the day his force was absorbed. Back on the road. So Ferguson has a car, a crest, and a radio network. Where does the network stop? It stops well short of the townships. Low-band VHF in 1956 follows terrain. On Highway 11, with the district transmitter behind him, Ferguson can raise dispatch. 11 miles east on a township road, in a valley, behind granite, he cannot, and neither can anyone else. The network was real, and it was a genuine advance. It was also a corridor, not a blanket, which means that for most of the ground he is responsible for, the operational information system is a rural telephone exchange staffed by a local operator who knows which farms have working phones, plus whatever Ferguson himself is carrying. Here is the context layer, and it is the whole reason this video exists. Between 1928 and 1950, Canada made a decision about that problem, province by province. In 1928, Saskatchewan contracted the RCMP as its provincial police, absorbing the Saskatchewan Provincial Police outright. During the Depression, provinces under financial pressure sought the same arrangement, and in 1932, the RCMP took over provincial policing in Alberta, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island, an expansion that nearly doubled the force to around 2,350 members. In August 1950, the last two contracts were signed, British Columbia and Newfoundland and Labrador. The RCMP's own account of what that produced is unusually blunt. It left only Ontario and Quebec with their own provincial police forces, and both still exist. The arithmetic was straightforward for the provinces that signed. A federal force, federal cost-sharing, national training, national records, and no provincial payroll to defend at budget time. It was, by the standards of the 1930s, an efficient answer to a real problem. Ontario and Quebec did not sign. Not because they had solved the problem better, Ferguson's radio dead zone is proof they had not, but because both provinces had reasons of their own for keeping a police force answerable to a provincial government rather than a federal one, and both had the population and revenue to pay for it. That is the decision. What did it look like on the ground? It looked like continuity, and continuity is not a sentiment, it is an operational property. The OPP's own history records the reality of the early small posting plainly. Many detachments had only one officer, who routinely relied on his wife to cook for the prisoners, type his reports, and answer the phone. In the earliest years, officers worked one-person detachments with no radio and no motor vehicle at all. By Ferguson's time, that has improved. He has a car, a partner on the other shift, a district behind him, but the shape has not changed. The detachment is small, it is local, and the man in it stays. 9 years is long enough for the territory to become an index, rather than a landscape. Ferguson knows which stretch of the township road past the second concession drifts first, because it runs east-west across an open field with the bush cleared on the windward side. He knows the culvert at the river flat backs up in a late March thaw, and which of the two approaches goes soft first. He knows the rail crossing on the county road has a bush line that closes the sight line from the north, and he slows there every single time without registering that he is doing it. He knows which of the farm lanes off that road will be blown shut by 4 o'clock, and which household is at the end of each one. None of that is in a manual. Some of it is in a soft-cornered notebook in his tunic pocket, in his own handwriting, and that notebook is his property, not the force's. When he is transferred, or when he retires, it goes with him. This is what a long posting builds, and it is the thing the contract policing arithmetic never had a column for. It is not measured, so it is not lost. Because nothing that was never counted can show up as a loss. Ontario built its version of this. What did Quebec build? Something structurally similar and culturally quite different. Quebec's provincial force is older than Ontario's, and its founding date is genuinely disputed. Multiple sources record 1 February 1870 as the creation of the Police Provinciale du Québec under its first commissioner, Judge Pierre-Antoine Doucet. Others give 1 May 1870 for the same act under the same commissioner, one of them specifying an initial strength of 65 officers. The lineage is sometimes traced further back still, to Lord Durham's 1838 arrangement of municipal forces for Montreal and Quebec, with a rural force covering the remainder. We give the range because the sources give the range. The structure that matters for a patrol officer in the 1950s dates from 1938. In that year, Maurice Duplessis, simultaneously Premier and Solicitor General, reorganized the force, renamed it the Sûreté Provinciale du Québec, and created permanent provincial police stations in each of the province's 9 judicial districts. Not detachments scattered by township, posts anchored to the judicial map. So picture the counterpart, a Sûreté agent, 11 years at his post, working the rang roads of a farming district in a marked sedan of the same generation as Ferguson's. Long ribbon farms running back from the road, houses close to the roadway, galleries and outside staircases, cordwood stacked to the eaves, snow banked square by the plow to the top of the fence wire. His territory knowledge has the same architecture and different contents. He knows which rang the plow reaches last. He knows the bridge with the single crossing point, and what the ice shove does to it in March. He knows the parish, and the parish, in rural Quebec in 1956, is an institution with its own reach. The curé knows things before the post does. That is not color, that is an information channel, and the agent who has been there 11 years is inside it. 2 provinces, 2 forces, 2 networks, 2 training systems. What does that separateness actually do at a farm gate? It changes who the officer answers to, and who answers to him. Take the ordinary contacts, because the ordinary contacts are the job. In an Ontario township, Ferguson stands at the counter of a general store with his cap under his arm and talks to the storekeeper. He stops at the one-room school and speaks to the teacher on the step. He waits at the shoulder of the switchboard operator in the telephone office because she is part of the operational chain and there is no substitute for her. He attends the township council meeting and stands at the back wall. In Quebec, the agent stands outside the presbytery in the snow and talks to the curé. None of these are dramatic. All of them are load-bearing. What a locally posted provincial officer has that a rotating officer does not is a two-way relationship with a fixed population. He knows them. More importantly, they know him, and they calibrate what they tell him accordingly. A call reporting a disturbance at a farm carries a different meaning to an officer who attended that farm 3 times in 4 years than it carries to a dispatcher 200 miles away reading a line of text. The call is the same. The information is not. There is a further layer here, and it is provincial rather than personal. Ferguson's force reports to an Ontario ministry. The agent's force reports to a Quebec one. The township that contracted its policing from the province in 1944 is dealing with an institution it can reach through its own provincial member. That is not an abstraction to a reeve or a mayor. It is the difference between a complaint that lands and a complaint that goes to Ottawa. Local knowledge and local accountability in the same uniform. But provincial accountability cuts in both directions. If the force answers to the province, what happens when the province wants something done? This is where the channel does not look away, because the same institutional property that produced the responsive local officer also produced the opposite. In Quebec, the record is documented, and it is severe. Duplessis, Premier from 1936 to 1939, and again from 1944 to 1959, held the Attorney General's powers himself, which gave him direct command of the provincial police. His 1937 padlock law allowed the Attorney General to padlock a building used to propagate communism for up to a year. It was not struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada until 1957. In February 1949, asbestos miners struck at Asbestos and Thetford mines. The government declared the strike illegal within days and sent the provincial police in. On 5 May, police attempted to force picket lines. The Riot Act was read the same day. On 6 May, provincial police beat and arrested strikers. The 7-month Murdochville copper strike of 1957 was likewise marked by confrontations between workers and police. This is not contested history. It is in the Dictionary of Canadian Biography and the Canadian Encyclopedia. Ontario's version was less violent and structurally identical. From 1916, the OPP carried the difficult and often unpopular duty of enforcing the Ontario Temperance Act, a provincial political program delivered by a provincial police force. And across both provinces, in the same decades, provincial policing operated at and around First Nations communities, inside a jurisdictional and institutional framework those communities did not design and were not asked about. Here is the honest formulation. A police force answerable to a provincial government is more reachable by the people it polices and more usable by the government that owns it. Ferguson at the store counter and the police line at the mine gate in 1949 are the same institutional design, seen from two ends. The design produced both. So how did that design end? Not with a scandal, with an upgrade. Start with the operational limit the officer was managing around, because that limit is what the upgrade was aimed at. Ferguson's car is a highway-patterned sedan. On a township road in a hard winter it needs chains, and he fits them himself, kneeling in the drift with his gloves off. The trunk carries a wool blanket, a short shovel, tow rope, chains and a lantern. Everything visibly used, nothing new. That inventory is not a precaution. It is an admission. On most of his territory, for most of the winter, he is the entire response. He starts the car himself on cold mornings. He digs out the stuck sedan on the highway himself, or with two men from the nearest farm. At night in blowing snow, he drives at a speed set by knowledge rather than by sight, because the headlights show him nothing, and the road is still there under the snow in the shape it has always been. Every one of those gaps is a real deficiency. A force that could reach him anywhere would be a better force. A force that could put a second car beside him in 20 minutes would be a better force. A force with common training standards and modern instruments would be a better force. None of that is nostalgia-proof. It is simply true. And that is precisely what both provinces built next, and built quickly. The trade was never presented as a trade. It was presented as coverage, and coverage is a genuine good. The question nobody in either provincial government asked in the planning documents, because there was no line for it, was what the officer standing on the shoulder in 1956 was contributing that the new system was not designed to receive. What came online, and what did it not carry? The Ontario sequence is dated precisely. Radar entered traffic enforcement in 1954. The breathalyzer went into service at Whitby in 1956, the same year Ferguson is standing on that shoulder. In 1963, a new era of modernization began with a changed command structure supporting the existing 17 police districts, and new ranking and promotion programs in which merit took precedence over seniority. Read that last clause slowly. Merit over seniority is a defensible reform, and it was overdue. It also quietly reprices the officer whose principal asset is 9 years in one place. Quebec's sequence runs alongside it. In 1961, the newly elected Lesage government redefined the force's administrative structure by law. In 1968, the name was shortened to Sûreté du Québec, and the Loi de Police of 21 June 1968 created the Institut de Police du Québec, no longer subordinate to any single police force, reporting directly to the Ministry of Justice. After the Séminaire de Nicolet closed on 30 May 1969, the province bought the site and installed the new academy under its first Director General, Maurice Baril. On 16 June 1969, 69 recruits arrived, 29 from the Sûreté du Québec and 40 from municipal forces, in one room, for the first time. That is a real achievement. Quebec had genuine disparities between forces, each with its own way of doing things, and a common standard fixed it. Alongside it came regional communications centers with 5 operating positions in a row, handheld portables that kept an officer in contact after he left the car, regional headquarters buildings with masts on the roof, fleet yards of identical cars, and wallboards on which the territory became a surface that could be managed from a room. Every one of those things is an improvement. What was the one thing none of them could take delivery of? The specific institutional end is dated and undramatic. Through the 1960s and into the 1970s, in Ontario and Quebec alike, small detachments and posts were consolidated into regional structures. Dispatch moved into centers, training moved into institutes, and the long single-station posting stopped being the normal shape of a career. Ontario's restructuring is dated to 1963, Quebec's to the Lodiau Police of 1968, and the opening of Nicolet in June 1969. No force was disbanded. Ontario and Quebec still have their own provincial police today. the only two provinces that do. What the change gave the institution: consistent training across every force in the province. Radio contact beyond the vehicle, faster backup, common records, instruments in place of estimates, promotion on merit, accountability that did not depend on which man happened to be posted where. These are real, and a police force without them in 1975 would have been a worse police force. What it did not give the townships and the rangs: the man who knew which field the road drifted across first, and why, and by what hour of which wind. The new system got there. It got there faster than Ferguson ever did, with a second car behind it and a radio that worked the whole way. It did not know that the lane at the 11-mile mark blows shut by 4 o'clock, or that the culvert at the river flat backs up in a late thaw, or what a February call from that particular farm had meant the last 3 times. Nobody asked what that thing was before he went home for the last time. There was no form for it. The soft-cornered notebook in his tunic pocket was his own property, and it left the building with him. The road is still there. It still drifts across the same field in the same wind, at the same hour. The knowledge is somewhere else now. If this channel is going to keep documenting what Canadian patrol officers knew about their territories and what it cost the institution when that knowledge left, subscribe. There are more roads, more detachments, more posts, more crossings, more calls with 3 pieces of information the dispatch did not contain, and none of it was ever asked to write itself down. Years at one posting gave this officer a working model of a specific piece of Canada that no dispatch center, no instrument, and no satellite has ever been designed to hold. And if you have a patrol route, a posting, a winter road, a detachment, a poste, put it in the comments. If you or your family wore the OPP or Sûreté uniform, tell us the one thing about that territory that never made it into a single report. Next, the Newfoundland Ranger Force, 1935 to 1950, the constable who walked his patrol, and the day his force was absorbed into someone else's.